All right, we are now recording. So welcome to tonight's webinar on native plants and pollinators. I'm very excited. This is one of my favorite topics to talk about with kids when I'm out in the field. And since I haven't had a lot of chances to talk with them out there because of COVID, I'm excited to have an audience to share this information with. So we have about 10 people here. Excuse me if I have to pause to let someone else in who's joining late, but I will get back to this as soon as I possibly can, running the one-man show here. So first, welcome, number one. We have about an hour together. I'm going to try to present for about 40 minutes. It may be a little bit shorter, it may be a little bit longer, depending on how much I want to go into detail on things or what pops into my brain at the moment. So first, we're going to talk about USDA zones. It's really important to have in mind when we're considering native plants and what we can put in our yards that's going to survive. Then we're going to talk about different types of pollinators we see in Pennsylvania. And then we're going to talk about native plants as well as some trees. This is a picture here. I believe this is a mason bee, which is a really great pollinator in the area. And we'll be talking about them more in just a few minutes. Oh, well, I moved the USDA zone information to be closer to native plants. So first we'll talk about pollinators. I am pregnant with twins, so I have a bit of pregnancy brain. So if there's something I'm stumbling over or forgetting, please forgive me for that. All right, so first of all, we have hummingbirds. So this is the ruby-throated hummingbird. This is the hummingbird that we see in Pennsylvania. It was really interesting when I lived out in Arizona. I'd see all sorts of different species there during migration season, and again in California. And then I came home and I have this little lovely creature here. So they spend their winters in Central America, down in that blue zone down there. And they should be arriving back in Pennsylvania in late-ish April. The males arrive a little bit earlier than the females, but they should be getting here pretty soon. So if you want to put out feeders for them, it's a good time to start thinking about that now. They arrive back in early April, but then they will only weigh 2 to 6 grams. So to think about that, that is about the weight of a paperclip to the weight of a quarter. So these are very, very tiny creatures. As we know, birds are usually pretty light for their size because of their hollow bones, but these are especially tiny. Another little fun fact about hummingbirds is they can beat their wings up to 53 beats per second, which is just mind-boggling to me. It makes me feel tired just thinking about it. But that's very important for them on their long migration. It really helps them to stay afloat during these heavy winds when they're so small. So as you can see here, the blue is where you'll see them during non-breeding season in the winter. They'll migrate up. You can find them in, pretty far over into the central United States, and then they make their way east for breeding. And a lot of them will make that journey across the Gulf of Mexico in one flight. There are not very many spots for them to stop, so they'll just kind of go for it. If you've seen the movie The Big Year, which is one of my favorites, they follow the life of, I'm not sure if it's a ruby-throated hummingbird, but of a hummingbird that is making the journey from its breeding area to its winter habitat. It's pretty interesting to see. Another fun fact, they're so short, the little legs are so short that they can't walk properly. They have to kind of scuttle. So if you see them on the ground, they're kind of sort of hopping along and scurrying. They're not going to walk properly and jump around like other birds will. So they're pretty fragile little creatures, and it's always good to provide them with food and nectar sources, since they are very energy dependent on their wings. Think of how much energy it takes to flap your wings 53 times per minute. So they need a lot of food available to them. They prefer red and orange flowers. I'm sure most of you know that already. The classic hummingbird feeder looks like a big red flower. My grandmother would go back and forth between having her hummingbird feeder out because she got so tired of the ants. So that's a wonderful reason to plant actual flowers instead of just using sugar water for them. Then we've got butterflies. Beautiful, of course, beautiful, beautiful creatures. Mind you, this is only a spattering of what you see of native butterflies in Pennsylvania. And if there's someone on here that's more of an expert of that, you know, again, at the end, feel free to jump in and talk to the group about what you know about butterflies. So we're going kind of clockwise here from the top left. That is an eastern tiger swallowtail. You'll see those a lot down in the restoration area. They're very beautiful. The red spotted purple, which is kind of interesting to me because it doesn't look very purple to me. It looks more kind of teal and indigo, but you know, whoever got to name it, that's what they wanted to name it. And maybe it looks different in different lighting. Then there's the monarch, the classic butterfly you think of when you think of butterflies. There's that monarch butterfly. Then we have a cabbage white. My son was chasing one of these around the yard last week, and he's 2.5. So, you know, he's putting together small sentences, but he was saying, catch butterfly flying. And I was like, yes, the butterfly's flying and you're catching him. It was very cute to see him attempt to get to this butterfly that in no way could he reach in any respect with his little body. Then we've got the Baltimore checker spot here. Not as common. And sometimes people just glimpse them out of the side of their eye and they think monarch because they see that orange and black and white spots, but they are their own special creature. There's a lot of other butterflies. Like I said, these are only 5 of the 15 or so common ones we see, but there's lots of others that are spotted rarely, but here that may be found on their various migration paths. And then moths, we can't forget moths. We don't think of them as frequently because they're only really out at night, but they are a very important pollinator for various plants that prefer to be open at night. And there's a lot of different plants and especially trees that are larval hosts for moths, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Native bees. I don't know if any of you were on our native bee webinar last spring. I believe there's a recording somewhere. If not, I can definitely send you the slides for that if you're interested in learning more about native bees specifically. This here is a bumblebee, as many of us know. Pennsylvania has over 300 species of native bees. You would never believe it, but once you start looking closely at a flower or a shrub that's in bloom, you will start to really see the intricate differences of those beautiful little bees. Some key characteristics for native bees. They're mostly solitary, or you think of, say, honeybees or, you know, more hornet type, wasp type, you know, for species. They are very communal, right? They live in nests together. So when you step on it, all hell breaks loose because there's hundreds and thousands of them living in the same spot. Whereas, you know, bumblebees, for example, they kind of like to nest very near each other, as do mason bees and leafcutter bees, but they often will have their own sort of hole that they like to live in. They're usually very gentle. They're not as aggressive as wasps or even honeybees are going to be. You know, I've tried to convince my son that bees are our friend, not to be scared of bumblebees. But they usually, if you don't bother them, they're not going to bother you. They're very curious though, so they'll want to check you out. They're great pollinators. They are way more effective at pollinating than honeybees are. They're just amazing. If you look at this bumblebee here, you can see he's got these sort of pockets on the back of his back legs, his or her back legs, and the orange stuff there, that's pollen. So they shove pollen into these sacs on their legs, and then they can take it back to their nest and put it where they can store it for food. Which is, I just think it's amazing how much you can see on there. So I've been talking about honeybees. So honeybees are not native. They're naturalized. They were brought over by European settlers, you know, when they came over, as they also brought over a lot of invasive species. So honeybees, again, have naturalized, so you may see them living out in the wild somewhere, but for the most part, they are kept in you know, resident or personal or commercial honey farming establishments. And there's lots of different types of honeybees, but this is not a honeybee webinar, but there is an interesting series on honeybee biology and behavior and such from Penn State. They have a really great set of webinars there. So again, if you're interested in that, I can share that information with you. Please feel free to get in touch. One thing I forgot to mention at the beginning, which I should have said, is that if you haven't noticed, 9 Mile Run is now officially Upstream Pittsburgh. We have made that transition. It's our 20th anniversary year. So in light of that and all the work that we've been doing and how much we've been branching out, we have rebranded to Upstream Pittsburgh. We've always thought upstream in many respects because it's what's upstream of 9 Mile Run that really has the big effect on it. So we are Upstream Pittsburgh. So please do note I have a new email address. It's rose@upstreampittsburgh, and you can find that on our new website, which I can put in the chat for you later, which is just upstreampgh.org. So yes, I'll put all that information in the chat for you so you have it. We're still the same people you know and love, the same mission, the same work, just a great new name and a shiny new logo. So yeah, if you have questions about that, feel free to ask. I don't know why it's popping up like this, but it's really important to plant natives. You know, we always think about seasonal interest for ourselves, you know, making sure we have different flowers in our gardens that are blooming at different times of year so that it can be beautiful for the human who's viewing it. But it's really important to the bees too. They need that variety throughout the year and food sources from spring through fall. And this is a really great graphic here to think about, and you can think about some of this. I will be talking about some of these plants in a few minutes here, but I will also be sharing this recording and the presentation with you so you can look at it later, so you can think about what you want to do with your landscaping. And this is great too. It shows you the different sizes of many of our native bees. So they've lumped them into larger categories, right? So we've got the honeybee as our non-native example. And then we've got little sweat bees, mining bees, mason bees, which I will talk about a little bit more in just a minute, squash bees, leafcutter bees, and bumblebees. So again, if you are outside and you have a minute to just sit and look at a shrub that's covered in bees, you'll see a lot of different types. It's really beautiful, the variety. So mason bees are a fun bee that you can welcome to your yard. These are lots of different examples of mason bee houses. You often find these for sale at various stores, but it's really important to note a couple characteristics of things that you need to keep in mind when you're making these mason bee / native bee homes. Number one, you want them to be arranged in some way so that you can take it apart, be that cutting open the straw or the bamboo tubes, or taking apart the house, the layers of the house, so that you can get the cocoons out and also keep the house clean. As you can see up here on the top right, for example, there's some great options here. There's straws, but then also they've made these wood blocks with holes drilled in them that they're not going to be able to clean in any way, and that can actually be harmful to the bees because, again, mildew and mold and other things can grow in there. But there is one great thing to mention about this little bee house, and that is it's got that sort of hardware cloth over top of it, and that's to prevent birds from coming in and pecking at the tubes and eating the cocoons that are in there. So what mason bees do is they put up a wall of mud, and then they put pollen and lay an egg inside the chamber. And they build another wall, another egg, more pollen, another chamber, et cetera, et cetera. And in the bottom, you can see there's these holes there that have been filled in that are sort of white. And those are tubes that have probably 5 or 6 mason bee cocoons in there. So you just keep them relatively warm and dry over winter, and then you can set them out in the spring, and they will hatch and do some great pollination for you. All right, so native plants. Many of you have probably seen this lovely map here before. This is the plant hardiness zone map from the USDA. And hopefully you can see my cursor here, and I'm in Oakmont, PA, so I'm right kind of on the cusp of zone 6A and 6B. But for most of you who are living in the watershed or around the Pittsburgh region, you're going to be in zone 6B. So hardiness zones are based on average minimum winter temperatures. So when we look back at this graphic before, you can see this sort of different, the zone 5A and 5B. These are the areas, you know, especially you're getting into some mountains and higher elevations and such. You know, my uncle is down here in Somerset County, and he's easily about a month behind us on leaves, the trees and such. So it's really interesting how much variety that you can have in such a small geographic area. So like I said, we live in zone 6B. So our average minimum winter temperature is between -5 to 0 degrees Fahrenheit. Thankfully, I don't think we saw any temperatures nearly that cold this winter. My heating bill was very happy about that. But that is possible, and we have seen that in recent years. So the plants that we're going to plant, we want to make sure that their perennials, their underground sort of root cluster is going to be able to survive in these temperatures. Our last spring frost is out to May 15th. That said, I already put some perennials out in the yard, and I'm just kind of watching the weather to see if there's going to be any frost warnings, and I'll take appropriate action by covering them up. And then our first fall frost is around October 15th. But like I said, that's, you know, kind of maximum dates based on averages. But every now and then we'll get snow in June or, you know, snow in early October. So you never really know what's coming with our Pennsylvania weather, especially with climate change occurring. So native plants are really great. They're well adapted to our region, obviously, because they've been here for hundreds, if not thousands of years. They require a lot less water than non-native species you're going to put in, again, because they've adapted to the climate that's here. It's going to be interesting to see what happens as we get higher rainfalls in the Pittsburgh area, how our flora and fauna is going to shift along with the temperature changes that are coming from climate change. They also have evolved with the native fauna that depends on them. So for example, you know, those pollinators, those bees, there's certain butterflies that have very long tongues that can get into certain flowers to pollinate them. And it's very important that we provide that food source for that fauna that is living here, because it's a key piece of food webs. You know, if you don't have pollinators, you know, a lot of birds depend on eating pollinators and also on the seeds that the plants produce in the fall. So pollinators and native plants are very, very integral pieces of these food webs we see throughout the world. They're lower maintenance also. There's some low mow or no mow sedges that you can find. There's also, like this picture here, you can convert part of your yard or all of your yard into wildflower meadows, and they require basically no maintenance. That said, if you live in a HOA or, you know, that kind of situation, always make sure you check to see what the situation is for rules regarding landscaping. You know, some people have very finicky neighbors who are not going to be very happy if they convert all of their lawn to a wildflower meadow. But you can put it in a garden bed if you put some bricks around the edge, and it makes it look a bit more formal and maintained. They also require a lot fewer fertilizers and herbicides because they have evolved based on the soil types we have in our area. But a quick note on natives. I'm sorry that picture's blurry. Native plants is a very Eurocentric definition. They are basically anything that was here before the European settlers arrived. is considered native. But that doesn't take into account all the ways that plants got here. You know, I'm sure that the native peoples brought plants from wherever they were living before, and they sort of naturalized and adapted to this space. So we really need to think about that as well as we consider native versus invasive versus naturalized, and where those areas sort of mesh together. You know, because, and like I said, climate change is happening. We're getting different temperatures, we're getting different amounts of rainfall, and the plants that are going to find their niche there and be able to survive in that on a continuous basis might be different than the natives that we have seen up to this point. And invasives aren't all bad. You know, I of course loathe Japanese knotweed because it occurs in the restoration space, and it's taking over area where, quote unquote, native plants had previously survived. And one of the key issues with that is that it's really lowering the biodiversity of the plants that we're seeing in the restoration space, because they're creating, you know, they pop up early, they create this sort of canopy, and the native seeds that are on the soil can't get the light or the water they need to germinate. So that is a definite problem. And I know we have some ecologists on the call today who I'm sure would be happy to expand upon this with any of us that have questions at the end. But, you know, Japanese knotweed does have some benefits. For example, it provides food for wildlife. The beaver that lives in 9 Mile Run loves knotweed. It eats a ton of it, provides a very important food source for them. It also helps the erosion control. They have very long, deep, widespread root systems that are very good at bank stabilization, and it's very helpful for roadways and riverbeds in that respect. That helps hold the soil in place. That said, of course, we could find some native options such as willows. Willows are a wonderful way to do stream bank stabilization. They just don't grow as fast. One interesting example of an invasive plant that sort of launched a seed company is crown vetch. Was used by PennDOT for many years along roadways to provide erosion control benefits. And now it's a very invasive plant, rampant in all sorts of spaces. And Ernst Conservation Seeds, which is in Meadville, was actually founded just to propagate crown vetch and create seed for PennDOT specifically. They have since stopped. They've created a naturalized version of crown vetch that is not as invasive, and they also do a lot of other seed mixes based on native plants to help establish these sort of restoration zones in a more naturalized way. So that's just a really interesting little way that an invasive plant launched a company that does a lot of good with native plants. If you want to take a deep dive into this concept, this book is great. It's called Beyond the War on Invasive Species. It's by Tao Orion. I have read it. You know, the first couple of chapters are a little bit rough to get through. There's a lot of information there on pesticides and chemicals, etc. But I would still highly recommend it. Maybe just don't worry too much about those first couple chapters, and don't let that mire you down for the rest of the fabulous reading that's ahead of you with this book. All right, so now we're going to launch into some native plants. I obviously did not have time in this presentation to go over all of them. I would love to, but that would be a many-day conference to talk about all these plants. So I've made a sort of guide here with these little icons. So obviously one is anti-deer. That means it's deer resistant. Please do note that nothing is deer proof in this world. It all depends on what they have available to eat. If they are low on food, they will go for your basil bomb. They will go for your bee balm. But there's lots of different ways to protect your garden from those wonderful yet pesky deer. And there's butterfly friendly, bee friendly, and hummingbird friendly. So these are bee balms and bergamots. I have a bunch of these in my yard I just planted. They smell amazing. These are really great for hummingbirds, especially, and bees and butterflies with longer tongues, because as you can see, they've got these very long cylindrical tubes there where the pollen is found. But they're just a really great plant to have in your yard. They can handle sun, they can handle shade, and they're very, or not very, but they're relatively drought resistant as well. So blazing star, this is a really fun plant. These giant purple pom-poms. One little fun fact about blazing star is that a lot of plants start blooming at the bottom of their stems and then go up. These guys start at the top of their little flower stems and then go down. So they create some interesting color. You can see the sort of browner old flowers at the top, and then it cascades into the more purple flowers. So also deer resistant, bunny somewhat resistant. I didn't go too much into rabbit resistance because in my personal experience, rabbits will go for anything. You have to protect them properly if you want to see that different. And all these plants that I'm showing you pictures of and talking about, there are a number of varietals that have been created, you know, different heights, different flower sizes, different shades of the flowers, different colored foliage. But some of those, again, are varietals, and they're not going to perform as well as a native plant would. So keep that in mind. And they're often more expensive than the plain old native varietal. One of my personal favorites, this is blue false-skin indigo. This picture doesn't really do the size of this plant justice, but these become really shrub-like perennials. They're very large. So if you're going to plant them in your yard, make sure that you have space for something that's going to grow 3 to 4 feet tall and wide. That said, pollinators love them. They've got this really beautiful blue color to them. You can get cultivars that are white. I like the blue personally. And then in the fall, late summer and fall, these plants make amazing seed pods that rattle. And so, you know, the kids love to play with them, and they will self-propagate to some extent, but it's much easier if you want to get more indigo to just buy plants that have been raised for that purpose, because it can take a while for them to establish. Even once you buy new ones, you're going to see that they take a few years to really get off the ground before they start blooming like crazy, unless you buy very large, already established plants. But again, those are more expensive. So if you plant a smaller one, just wait a few years and you will get that beautiful burst of color. It just likes to develop its root system a bit more before it goes crazy up top. Coneflowers, a very common perennial we see around here. Again, you see them in all sorts of different color varieties. There are some dwarf varietals of these that we use sometimes in our gardens, depending on what customers are looking for, but this is the classic purple coneflower echinacea here. These make wonderful seed pods, seed heads in the fall and winter. So in general, I always recommend leaving what you can without cutting back your garden if you're comfortable with that, because there's a lot of seed that's made available to the birds, but also that dead leaf plant matter provides shelter for animals in the winter as well. Asters, so many types of asters. I can't go through all of them individually, but for the most part, they are deer resistant. They get a bit unruly sometimes. They're not a very, you know, tidy, compact plant. They kind of grow. Again, they can be shrub-like at times. So again, if you're planting these, either get a dwarf compact variety or be ready for some space and a more wild-looking plant in your yard. It's really great on the edge of wooded areas because it likes part shade, part sun. So it does well with other trees in sort of a border garden in that respect. Again, they come in many different colors, many different flower sizes shapes and sizes. But very beautiful, and pollinators absolutely adore them. Really important here are butterfly, I should say butterfly and milkweeds, but milkweed is crucial for monarch survival. Common milkweed, which is the one on the top right there with the light purple flowers and the big broad leaves, that is the only food for larval monarchs, those lovely black, white, and yellow striped caterpillars you'll see. And so if you want to help monarchs, which they need help, please consider planting some milkweed in your yard. They will spread pretty aggressively after a few years. They send out babies, but also they have those beautiful big seed pods that are bright green, and they turn into a brown dry. And again, you can sort of hear it's kind of a hollow sound when you tap on it. And if you ever want to collect milkweed seeds in the fall, there's lots of different patches growing along roadsides, etc. Number one, be careful not to take all the pods, just take one. There are hundreds of seeds per pod, so you don't need more than one. And that way it will be able to spread naturally in that space. You can also buy them through a number of different groups. I know the Audubon Society, Beechwood Farms, they sell them there. I'm not sure if they sell them in the gift shop or only the nursery, but when you buy little packets of the nursery, they have been cold stratified, which means that they have been put in the fridge over winter so that when you plant them, they know it's spring and they're ready to grow. If you leave them out all winter in their room temperature, you're usually going to have to wait a season until you see the fruits of your labor there. So make sure you get cold stratified seeds. You can also buy seedlings at the Audubon's native plant nursery. I believe they're opening this weekend. Great resource for native plants. There's common milkweed. Then we have, this is actually a picture of butterfly weed. So common milkweed's top right, butterfly weed is the bottom right with that, I believe it's a red spotted purple, maybe I'm wrong on there. It's got a lovely orange flower to it, so it pairs nicely with the common or swamp milkweed, which is that top left picture, the bright pink. And then at the bottom we have something called poke milkweed, which I've never seen in person. I guess it's relatively rare, but it is another great host for butterflies. Goldenrods. Goldenrods get a pretty bad rap. They bloom at the same time as ragweed, so people think that they're allergic to goldenrods. It's highly unlikely that you're allergic to goldenrods. It's that ragweed that's getting up in there and irritating your body. So goldenrods are really, really important late season pollinator, and so it's, again, like milkweed, really important that we put more out there for the bees. I used to have honeybees, and I know that they were always full of pollen and nectar during goldenrod season, and a lot of beekeepers will have to put extra honey supers on their hive just to accommodate the goldenrod flow. Another plant that's really great for our naturalized honeybees is Japanese knotweed. Knotweed honey is absolutely delicious. I would highly recommend getting some to try if you haven't had it yet. So there's another interesting benefit of knotweed. So there's two main varietals you're going to see in Pennsylvania, Western Pennsylvania. So there's the rough stem goldenrod, which is this picture, and they have these pretty big clumps of flowers up at the end. And then the wreath goldenrod has longer, skinnier sort of shoots of flowers coming off. So it's not quite as compact in that respect. And it's usually a little bit lighter yellow color, but it does look beautiful and has some great benefits as well. Cardinal flower, as you can see here, this is a hummingbird on a cardinal flower. So like the bergamots, they've got these long skinny tubes that you need a long bill or a long tongue to get into, but this is mainly a hummingbird plant. and absolutely beautiful, bright shock of red in your garden. And they usually grow pretty tall and skinny. Trumpet vine, I love trumpet vine. It's very fast growing, so you'll see it on a lot of fences and that sort of, or trellises, because it grows quickly and it provides a really nice sort of privacy cover in that respect. But it also has these beautiful flowers that hummingbirds adore. So if you're looking for a vine that's going to look lovely and also attract some hummingbirds to your yard, trumpet vine is your choice. Joe Pyweed, we have a lot of this down in the restoration area. I love it. It gets to be very, very tall, up to 7 feet in wet areas. So in wetlands, it's going to really be a dominating species in that respect. Lovely flowers, and you know, again, deer resistant, not deer proof, but pollinators love it as well. And I especially like that it's got this dark purple stem that adds a little bit of extra interest to it. But again, it's a pretty dominating plant, so I would not recommend using it in at the forefront of your garden space. You're not going to be able to see any other plants after that gets in there, so put it kind of at the back or in a corner, especially where you might have some wet space in your yard that needs some cover there. Phlox, another great option. You know, if you want some purpley sort of tall covers, these are not going to be anywhere near as tall as Joe Pyweed, but they're long and skinny. I always think they have really nice motion to them, but they're also very great for woodland borders or in a sort of shaded garden space. And again, they come in a lot of different color varietals. Some shrubs, buttonbush, my personal favorite shrub of the Pennsylvania wetlands. I always think it looks like Horton Hears a Who. You know, I read that to my son a lot, so maybe that's why it's in my brain. A lot of people have said it looks like the coronavirus. So, you know, take it however you want to take it, but it's a really great shrub. I know there's some growing along the boardwalk along 9 Mile Run. So if you catch it the right time of year, usually starts blooming in June or so, you'll get to see these lovely white flowers that then turn into smaller, hard brown seed balls. So great food source for birds. And again, they really like wet areas. So if you got a wet corner in your yard that you can't really get any other shrubs to grow in, buttonbush is for you. Elderberry, edible for humans as well as for birds. So if you're trying to grow these for medicinal purposes for yourself, make sure you put some sort of netting over them to prevent the birds from eating all of your elderberries. They're not all deer resistant. There are some deer resistant varieties available. So if that's an issue in your yard, make sure you choose appropriately. There's some other berries that are local and great. We've got wild blueberries, which are up on the top right there. And then a lot of people don't know about huckleberries, but they are delicious. They're usually a relatively small shrub. You can tell that the blueberries have, well, you can't tell here, but the blueberries are bigger in size. Huckleberries are pretty small, and they also have much smaller leaves, as you can see, than the blueberry bush. The property I grew up on up near Butler had tons of huckleberries, so I spent summers just wandering the woods eating them and coming back all blue and purple, which was a delicious way to spend the day. We also had a lot of black raspberries. So these are one of our native raspberries. You'll see the canes in the winter. They have that sort of blue, powdery, purple blue sheen to them. That's how you know those black raspberries are there. Very aggressive spreaders though. So if you want to grow black raspberries in your yard, make sure you put them in some sort of container like an old whiskey barrel or some such thing where you can control the roots and the rhizomes spreading. Otherwise, your whole yard is going to be black raspberries. And those are deer resistant because of the thorns. Spice bush, we have some of this down in the restoration area. You can notice it, especially in the fall, because it gets this bright yellow, beautiful foliage. And then it gets little yellow blossoms that turn into these nice red berries. When they're small, the deer can still do them, but when they're older and they're more fragrant and aromatic, the deer don't like to bother them as much. So just keep them protected when they're little. And we can't forget trees. Trees are super important. You know, we don't think of them as being pollinator friendly because they have very small flowers normally, especially these varieties. But, you know, they have little flowers, they have pollen, they get my nose every time. But a really important thing about trees is that they support a lot of butterfly and moth species that depend on these trees are critical for their survival. So for example, a black cherry tree could host up to 465 or 56 different moth species, which is just amazing to me. So that cherry I've got in my yard, very important, and I'm going to keep it there. So never forget about trees. It's important to keep them. If you have big trees, keep them healthy, and always plant more if you can. So quick little recap here. This is a monarch butterfly larva, which I just think are the coolest things. Number one, native plants are awesome. They're super important to have in your yard and to plant in disturbed areas if possible. Pollinators are very critical to food webs and depend on these native plants to survive. There's a lot of different varieties of native plants. I only dipped our toe into them. There's lots of different ones that you can put in your yard. There's some great resources from the, again, the Audubon Society has some really great lists. They're more focused on birds, but that said, birds eat insects, birds eat caterpillars, right? So they want to have all those plants that will support the various things that birds will eat as well. And don't forget the importance of trees. Trees are super important to your yard. They also take up a lot of stormwater, and they're just amazing. All right, so that is the end of my presentation. Sorry if I went through it kind of fast, but I want to make sure we had time for questions. So I'm going to stop recording now, and so people can feel free to chat away. If I can figure out how to stop recording. Stop recording. Okay,